My girlfriend wanted us to date other people to test my loyalty. She didn't realize I couldn't be chained. I think we should see other people, Laura said, scrolling through her phone. My sister did it before her engagement. It made them stronger. I looked up from my laptop. 3 years together, and she drops this over morning coffee. You're joking. I'm serious. 3 months. We date others, then come back together. If you really love me, you'll choose me in the end. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes told me everything. This wasn't about us. This was about someone else. Jess, if something's wrong, just tell me. Nothing's wrong. I just think we need to be sure before I waste more of my 20s. She finally looked at me. Unless you're scared, I'll find someone better. There it was. The challenge. The manipulation. Fine. 3 months. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Perfect. I already made a Hinge profile. Already made, of course. That night she went out. New dress, new perfume, wouldn't say where. Came back at 3 a.m. humming. I pretended to sleep. I downloaded Bumble that night, wrote that I was temporarily exploring while in a relationship, figured honesty would limit matches, but then Katie matched with me immediately. She was a pediatric nurse, a foster dog mom, and sent a message about my bio. Temporarily exploring? That's a new one? Coffee and an explanation? We met at this small place near the hospital where she worked. She wore scrubs with cartoon pandas and apologized for coming straight from a shift. So your girlfriend wants you to date other people? She stirred her coffee, genuinely curious. That's either very evolved or very concerning. I'm leaning toward concerning. What does she think will happen? That I'll realize she's the one, I guess. Katie laughed. Not mean, just understanding. Or she's already dating someone and needs permission. My stomach dropped. It made sense. The sudden distance. The weird schedule changes. The way she'd been guarding her phone like state secrets. Sorry, Katie said. That was harsh. I don't know your situation. No, you might be right. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her 12-hour shifts, the kid who finally got a heart transplant, her foster-failed dog who ate her couch. When Laura texted asking where I was, I realized I hadn't thought about her once. Laura was in the shower when I got home. Her phone buzzed with James from work. Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. Wear the red one I like. 6 months of messages scrolled back. While I was planning our future, she was planning her escape. Week 2, Laura started the performance, leaving for dates in dresses I'd never seen. Coming home with hickeys she'd claim were allergic reactions. Testing me. How was your date? I'd ask. Fine. This experiment is really opening my eyes. She'd watch my face, waiting for jealousy. But I just kept seeing Katie. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became walking her dog together. She never pushed, never asked about Laura. I should tell you, Katie said one afternoon, throwing a ball for her foster dog. I don't do complicated. My job is complicated enough. So when you figure out what you're doing, let me know. Laura, meanwhile, became manic about my dating life. Who are you seeing? What does she look like? Is she prettier than me? She started doing things she'd never done. Cooking elaborate meals, wearing lingerie to bed, trying to mark her territory. Jess, you wanted this. I wanted you to fight for me. By dating other people? She threw her phone. You were supposed to hate it. To realize I'm all you need. Then why are you covered in someone else's cologne? Silence. Then, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. She broke down. Admitted James had been pursuing her for months. She'd resisted until she felt ignored. Classic Laura. Nothing was ever her fault. Week 6, Katie texted that she'd adopted the foster dog officially. Sent a picture of the adoption papers. Figured if I'm going to commit to something, might as well start here. I smiled like an idiot at my phone. That night, Laura came home crying, makeup ruined, dress torn at the zipper. He doesn't want me, she sobbed. James said I was just fun, nothing serious, that he could never leave his fiancée for someone who'd cheat. You've been seeing an engaged man? We worked together. It just happened. But I thought if you were dating too, it wouldn't be wrong. That's not how this works. I know. She collapsed on our couch. I ruined everything, but we can fix this. End the experiment early. Go back to normal. There is no normal anymore, Jess. She grabbed my hands. Please, I'll do anything. Therapy, couples counseling, whatever you want. I want honesty. How long has James been happening? She looked away. 3 months, she lied through her teeth. I'm done, Jess. You can't leave me. She pulled me closer, desperate. I'm pregnant. Everything stopped. What? 5 weeks. I just found out. She touched her stomach. It's a sign. The universe telling us to work this out. I knew I had a choice to make. I sat there on the couch not moving while she kept one hand on her stomach. My brain started doing math I didn't want to do. We'd last slept together maybe 3 weeks ago, which could line up with 5 weeks pregnant if you counted from her last period. But she'd also been sleeping with James for who knows how long, so the timing worked for him too. Laura watched my face and I could see her trying to read what I was thinking. I needed facts before I could make any decision about what came next. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to get some space. She followed me and grabbed my arm. I pulled away gently but firmly. We needed to talk about this like adults, not like whatever we'd been pretending to be for the past 6 weeks. I turned around and looked at her directly. We had to have an honest conversation about dates and who this baby's father actually was. She immediately got defensive and started talking fast about how she tracked her cycle in an app and knew exactly when she ovulated. I let her finish and then pointed out the obvious problem. She'd been sleeping with James too, so unless she had separate tracking for both of us, she couldn't actually know for sure. Her face went red and she started crying, asking how I could accuse her of not knowing her own body. I stayed calm and explained that I wasn't accusing her of anything except sleeping with 2 people during the same time period. That was just a fact. We needed a paternity test before anything else could happen. She sobbed that I didn't trust her, and that hurt more than anything else she'd done. I almost laughed at that but managed to keep it together. Trust was something she'd destroyed months ago when she started planning her escape with James. She grabbed tissues from the counter and kept crying while I stood there waiting for her to calm down. Finally, she asked what I wanted to do, and I told her we'd get a paternity test as soon as medically possible. She said fine, but kept insisting it was unnecessary because she just knew it was mine. I went to my laptop that night after she went to bed and started searching everything about paternity testing during pregnancy. Turns out they can do something called non-invasive prenatal paternity testing as early as 7 weeks with just a blood draw from the mom. The baby's DNA shows up in her bloodstream, and they can compare it to potential fathers through cheek swabs. I found a lab about 20 minutes away that specialized in this kind of testing and read through all their information. The test cost around $1,500 and took about a week to get results back. I bookmarked the page and made a note to call them first thing Monday morning. Laura came out of the bedroom around midnight and saw me still on the laptop. She asked what I was doing, and I told her I was researching paternity tests. She sat down next to me and looked at the screen, then got quiet. I asked if she wanted to see what I'd found, and she nodded. We sat there together reading about the process, and she admitted it seemed less complicated than she'd thought. I called the lab Monday morning and scheduled an appointment for the following week, when Laura would be just past 7 weeks. The receptionist was professional and didn't ask questions about our situation. Laura agreed to go, but kept saying it felt wrong to doubt the pregnancy like this. I knew I needed to call Katie and explain what was happening. She'd been honest with me from the start and deserved the same respect. I waited until Laura went to work, and then sat in my car in the parking lot of our apartment. Katie answered on the second ring and sounded happy to hear from me. I told her about the pregnancy announcement and the paternity uncertainty. She got very quiet, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. Finally, she said she needed to step back completely until I had clarity about my situation. It hurt to hear that, but I understood completely. Her life was already complicated enough with her job, and she didn't need my mess added to it. I thanked her for everything and told her she'd helped me see what a healthy relationship could look like. She wished me luck and said she hoped things worked out however they were supposed to. We hung up and I sat in my car for another 10 minutes just staring at my phone. That was it. The one good thing that had come out of this whole disaster was now gone. I moved my stuff to the couch that evening and told Laura we were roommates until this got sorted out, not a couple trying to work things out. She protested immediately, saying we should be supporting each other through the pregnancy. I explained as calmly as I could that I couldn't pretend everything was fine when I didn't even know if this child was mine. She started crying again and said I was being cruel. I reminded her that she was the one who wanted to see other people, and she was the one who'd been sleeping with James for months. Those were her choices, and now we had to deal with the results. She asked where this left us, and I said it left us as two people waiting for medical test results. Nothing more until we knew the truth. She went to the bedroom and slammed the door. I made up the couch with sheets and a blanket from the hall closet. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than sharing a bed with someone I couldn't trust. The first prenatal appointment happened 2 weeks later, when Laura hit 8 weeks. I went with her because I wanted to hear medical facts and timelines directly from a doctor. The obstetrician was a woman in her 50s who treated us with professional neutrality, despite the obvious tension in the room. She did an ultrasound and showed us the tiny blob on the screen that was supposedly a baby. Laura cried and reached for my hand, but I kept mine in my lap. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy was progressing normally, and the dates matched up with what Laura had said. Then she asked if we had questions, and I brought up paternity testing. The doctor didn't even blink, just pulled out some information sheets about the process. She explained it was safe for both mother and baby, and could be done any time after 7 weeks. Laura sat there silently, while the doctor went through everything. We left with a folder full of information, and another appointment scheduled for 4 weeks out. I scheduled an STD screening for myself the next day, because I couldn't stop thinking about the chain of people involved. Laura had been sleeping with James, who'd been sleeping with his fiancée, and who knew where else that chain led. The clinic had an opening that afternoon, and I took it. Sitting in the waiting room with a bunch of college students made me feel old and stupid. The nurse who did my blood draw was kind and didn't make me explain anything. She said results would be ready in a few days and they'd call either way. I walked out feeling humiliated, but also relieved that I was being practical about my health. This was just one more thing I had to do to protect myself from the mess Laura had created. Laura tried to initiate sex about a week later, coming out of the bedroom in lingerie I'd never seen before. She said we should be close during this time and reached for me on the couch. I moved away and reminded her about our boundaries. She got angry fast, accusing me of being cold and punishing her. I explained that I was protecting myself emotionally until we had answers about paternity and our future. She called me heartless and said most men would step up and support their pregnant girlfriend. I pointed out that most girlfriends didn't sleep with their coworkers while pretending to run an experiment. She threw a pillow at me and went back to the bedroom. I heard her crying through the door but didn't go to her. I was done being manipulated by tears. I decided to reach out to James directly because he deserved to know what was happening. I found him on social media through Laura's profile and sent a carefully worded message. I introduced myself and explained that Laura was pregnant and paternity testing was happening. I kept it factual and didn't accuse him of anything. He responded within an hour with a message full of anger. He said Laura had told him she was on birth control and accused her of trying to trap someone. He called her crazy and said he wanted nothing to do with any of this. Then he blocked me before I could respond. I showed Laura the message and she went pale. She insisted she had been on birth control, but admitted she'd missed a few pills during stressful weeks. I asked if she'd told James that and she looked away. Of course she hadn't. She'd let him think everything was fine while playing both of us. Laura's sister Lexi called me 2 days later completely out of nowhere. She said Laura had told her everything and she wanted to help mediate. I listened while she explained that Laura had always had abandonment issues from their dad leaving when they were kids. She said Laura made bad choices when she felt insecure and needed people to understand that. I stayed polite and told her I appreciated the context, but family history didn't excuse lying and manipulation. I had to focus on practical next steps rather than excuses. Lexi got quiet and then said she hoped I'd give Laura another chance for the baby's sake. I told her the baby would be fine either way because I'd be a responsible father regardless of my relationship with Laura. Lexi said that was all she could ask for and hung up. I sat there thinking about how Laura's whole family seemed to enable her bad behavior by making excuses. I found a therapist named Audrey Howe online 2 days later. She had good reviews and specialized in relationship problems. Her office was in a small building downtown with a waiting room that smelled like lavender. I filled out intake forms asking about my relationship history and what brought me in. When she called me back, she was maybe 50 with gray hair and kind eyes. She listened while I explained everything about Laura, James, the pregnancy, the paternity uncertainty. She didn't interrupt or look shocked. When I finished, she asked what I wanted from therapy. I told her I needed to figure out how to handle this without losing my mind or becoming a bad person. She smiled and said those two things weren't connected the way I thought they were. Being kind didn't mean letting people hurt me. Being responsible didn't mean staying in a broken relationship. We spent the rest of the session talking about guilt and how I'd been taught that good people sacrifice their happiness for others. She gave me homework to write down every time I felt guilty and examine whether I actually did something wrong or just failed to meet someone else's unfair expectations. I left feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next morning, I went to a different bank across town and opened a new checking account. I transferred half our shared savings into it and started a spreadsheet tracking my expenses separately from Laura's. Rent, utilities, groceries, everything got split down the middle on paper. Laura noticed within 2 days when she checked our joint account balance. She came home from work looking upset and asked why I was moving money around. I explained that I needed clear financial boundaries regardless of what happened with the baby. She said it felt like I was preparing to abandon her. I reminded her that she'd been the one planning an exit strategy with James for months while I paid our bills. She went quiet and walked away. I kept updating the spreadsheet every day. My landlord lived in the building, so I knocked on his door that weekend to talk about our lease. He was an older guy who'd always been decent about maintenance requests. I explained that my girlfriend and I were splitting up and asked about options when our lease ended in 4 months. He nodded like he'd seen this before and said we could either find someone to take over my half or he'd work with us on breaking the lease early if needed. He mentioned that spring was good for finding subtenants because of people moving for new jobs. I thanked him and felt relieved to have a practical exit plan forming. Having concrete steps made everything feel less overwhelming. My phone buzzed that afternoon with a text from Katie. She sent a picture of her dog wearing a bright green sweater with reindeer on it. The message said she hoped I was doing okay. I smiled at the photo and texted back that the sweater was ridiculous and I was glad she adopted him. I kept it light and didn't dump my problems on her. She sent back a thumbs up and a dog emoji. It felt good knowing she still cared enough to check in, even though she'd set boundaries. I didn't push for more. Week 9 came faster than I expected. Laura and I drove to the lab for the paternity test blood draw without talking much. The parking lot was half empty on a Tuesday morning. Inside, the technician was a young woman who explained the process while preparing the needle. She said they'd test Laura's blood for fetal DNA and compare it to my sample. Results would take about a week. Laura sat very still in the chair with her eyes closed, while the technician drew 3 vials of blood. Her face was pale and she looked scared in a way I hadn't seen before. When it was my turn, I watched the dark red blood fill the tube and thought about how weird it was that this would answer everything. We left separately because Laura said she needed to go straight to work. I sat in my car for a while thinking about what the results might show. My STD test results came back negative 3 days later through the clinic's online portal. I logged in during my lunch break and felt this huge wave of relief seeing all the negative markers. At least my physical health was intact. I didn't mention the test to Laura because it would just start another fight about trust. She'd accuse me of thinking she was dirty or something. I saved the results to my email and closed my laptop. That same week, Laura came home looking upset about something at work. She threw her bag on the couch and said people were gossiping about her and James. Apparently someone had seen them together before everything blew up, and now rumors were spreading through her department. She wanted sympathy about how unfair it was that people were judging her personal life. I pointed out that sleeping with a coworker had obvious workplace consequences. She called me heartless and said I should be supporting her. I reminded her that she'd made these choices and needed to deal with the results. She went to the bedroom and slammed the door. I called Chase that night and told him everything that had happened since the pregnancy announcement. He listened without interrupting, and then said he'd help me move whenever I needed it. He didn't try to fix anything or tell me what to do. He just said he was there if I needed him. Having someone in my corner who wasn't trying to solve my problems or take sides made me feel less alone. I thanked him and we talked about normal stuff for a while, which felt good. Laura surprised me a few days later by showing me confirmation emails for therapy appointments she'd scheduled. She said she wanted to work on herself no matter what happened with us. I told her I was glad she was getting help, but it didn't change my boundaries. She looked hurt, but nodded. I knew therapy was good, but actions mattered more than intentions. She'd have to prove through her behavior that she was actually changing. The paternity test results email came exactly 1 week after the blood draw. I opened it sitting at my desk and read through the medical language twice to make sure I understood. Insufficient fetal DNA for conclusive results. The lab explained that this happens sometimes in early pregnancy, and we'd need to wait until week 12 to try again. Another month of living in this weird limbo where nothing was settled. Laura cried when I showed her the email. I just felt tired. We had 4 more weeks of uncertainty ahead, and I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I started browsing rental listings the next day during my lunch break. Studio apartments in my price range were mostly in older buildings farther from downtown, but I needed options ready regardless of what the paternity test showed. I saved 3 promising listings to a folder on my laptop and made notes about security deposits and move-in dates. That evening, Laura walked past while I had the rental site open and stopped cold. She stared at the screen for a long moment before her face crumpled. She asked what I was doing and I told her the truth. I needed to be ready for whatever happened. She sank onto the couch and started crying, saying I was giving up on us before we even knew if the baby was mine. I closed my laptop and explained I was preparing for multiple futures, not making a final decision. She wiped her eyes and said it felt like I was already gone. I stayed quiet because part of me was already gone, had been since I found those messages from James. She went to the bedroom and I heard her crying through the door, but I didn't follow. 2 days later, Laura came home from work looking shaken and told me James had been moved to a different team. Apparently, HR had caught wind of the situation through office gossip and decided to separate them to avoid workplace drama. She said he wouldn't even look at her in the hallway that morning when she tried to talk to him. I felt this weird mix of satisfaction and guilt. James was facing consequences too, even if his life would be way less disrupted than ours. Laura kept checking her phone all evening like she expected him to text, but nothing came. She finally threw her phone on the couch and said she felt stupid for thinking he actually cared about her. I didn't say anything because what was there to say? I had my therapy session with Audrey the following afternoon and told her about the apartment hunting and the limbo of waiting for the retest. She asked how I felt about potentially being a father under these circumstances. I admitted I was scared, but also felt this strange sense of responsibility already. She nodded and said, responsibility didn't equal staying in a broken relationship. We talked about co-parenting without being romantic partners. She explained how I could be a good dad and still have boundaries with Laura. She said a lot of people confuse duty with love and end up miserable trying to force something that isn't working. That made sense to me in a way nothing else had. I left her office feeling clearer about what I needed to do. That night, Laura had what felt like her first moment of real honesty since this whole mess started. We were both in the living room and she suddenly put down her phone and looked at me. She said she needed to tell me something. I waited and she took a deep breath. She admitted she started the whole experiment because she wanted permission to pursue James without feeling guilty about cheating. She thought I would just date casually while she explored something real with him. She never expected me to actually connect with someone like Katie. Her voice cracked when she said Katie's name. I sat there processing this and realized it explained everything. The sudden proposal, the already made dating profile, the way she seemed surprised when I actually went out with someone. I thanked her for finally being honest. She looked shocked that I wasn't yelling. She asked if knowing the truth changed anything. I told her it actually made me more certain we shouldn't be together because we clearly wanted different things from a relationship. She started to argue but stopped herself. She asked what I wanted. I said I wanted honesty and respect, and a partner who didn't play games with my feelings. She nodded slowly and said she understood. We sat in silence for a while and it felt like something had shifted between us. Not fixed, but at least honest. At week 12, we went back to the lab for the second blood draw. The technician was the same woman from before and she remembered us. She said this one should work because there was more fetal DNA in Laura's bloodstream now. She drew the blood efficiently and told us results would take another 10 days. Laura thanked her quietly, and we left separately because she had to go to work. The tension in our apartment over the next week and a half was almost unbearable. We moved around each other like strangers, careful not to touch or make eye contact. I found myself staying late at work just to avoid being home. I spent my evenings browsing rental listings and finally found a decent sublet available in 3 weeks. The guy was going overseas for work and needed someone to take over his lease. The rent was reasonable and the place was furnished. I put down a deposit without telling Laura because I needed to move out regardless of the test results. Living together was making everything harder. I needed physical space to think clearly about whatever came next. When I told Laura about the sublet, she just nodded like she expected it. Then her family started calling. First her mom, then her sister Lexi, then even her aunt who I'd only met twice. They all had the same message. Laura needed support, and I shouldn't abandon her during this difficult time. They painted her as a victim of her own poor choices who deserved another chance. I listened politely to each of them and then firmly explained I wasn't abandoning Laura or a potential child. I would be there for whatever co-parenting responsibilities came. But I also wasn't staying in a relationship built on lies and manipulation. Her mom got upset and said I was being selfish. I told her I needed to go and ended the call. The calls kept coming for a few days, but I stopped answering. Chase came over the following weekend to help me start packing. We worked methodically through my stuff, boxing up books and clothes and kitchen items I'd accumulated over 3 years. Laura sat on the couch the whole time watching us with this miserable expression. She didn't try to stop me or make dramatic pleas. She just watched. Chase asked if I wanted to grab lunch and I said yes just to get out of the apartment. Over burgers, he told me he was proud of me for setting boundaries. That meant more than he probably knew. When we got back, Laura was in her room with the door closed. We finished packing most of my stuff and stacked the boxes against the wall. That night, I was scrolling through social media and saw Katie had posted a picture. She was at a restaurant with someone who might be a date. Some guy with his arm around her chair, both of them smiling. I felt this sharp pang of jealousy mixed with sadness. I wanted to comment or reach out, but I didn't, because she deserved to move on with her life. She'd been clear about her boundaries, and I respected that. But it hurt seeing concrete evidence that she was doing exactly what she said she would. I closed the app and stared at my boxes stacked against the wall and thought about how everything had changed in just a few months. The email came 3 days later while I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store. Subject line said results available, and my hands shook so bad I almost dropped my phone trying to open the attachment. The PDF loaded slowly, and I stared at the numbers, not really understanding them at first. Then I saw it. Probability of paternity, 99. 9%. I set the phone down on the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel. 20 minutes passed while I just sat there breathing and watching people push carts across the parking lot. A woman loaded groceries into her trunk. A kid dropped his juice box and started crying. Normal life happening all around me while mine completely changed direction. I picked up my phone again and looked at the numbers one more time to make sure I read them right. Then I started the car and drove to the apartment. Laura was on the couch watching something on her laptop when I walked in. She looked up and her face went pale because she could probably tell from my expression. I handed her my phone without saying anything. She read the results and tears started running down her face, but she was also smiling a little. Relief mixed with fear, exactly like the outline said. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. We needed to figure out a co-parenting plan that works for both of us. Not a relationship, not trying to fix things, just how we handle raising a kid together while living separate lives. She nodded and wiped her face with her sleeve. No arguments, no begging, just acceptance that the relationship part was truly over. I took my phone back and went to my room to call Katie. She answered after 2 rings, and I could hear traffic in the background like she was outside somewhere. I told her about the test results and thanked her for being honest with me when I needed it most. She was quiet for a second, then said she was glad I had answers and hoped everything worked out. But her voice had this distance to it. She was kind, but also making it clear she was moving forward with her own life. I told her I understood and hoped she found someone who deserves her. We said goodbye, and I sat on my bed staring at the boxes still stacked against the wall. Moving day was in 4 days, and I needed to finish packing. The sublet guy had confirmed everything was ready. I spent the rest of that week sorting through the last of my stuff and avoiding Laura as much as possible. She tried a few times to start conversations about baby names or nursery colors, but I shut it down. We could talk about practical stuff after I moved out and had some space to think. Chase showed up early on moving day with his truck, and we loaded everything in 2 trips. The sublet was across town in an older building with creaky floors, but the rent was reasonable. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, bathroom with tiles that didn't quite match. The guy had left basic furniture, including a couch that sagged in the middle and a bed frame that squeaked when you sat on it, but it was mine. My own space where I could think without Laura's emotional presence constantly demanding attention. I unpacked the essentials that first night and ordered pizza because I was too tired to cook. Sitting alone in my new place eating mediocre pizza felt better than the last month living with Laura. My stress levels dropped immediately just from having physical distance. 2 days later, Laura texted asking if we could meet to talk about practical stuff. I suggested a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug. I got coffee and sat down across from her. The conversation was awkward at first. Long pauses. Careful word choices. But we managed to cover the basics. Doctor appointments, and she wanted me at the important ones. Finances, and we needed to split costs fairly. What happens after the baby is born and how custody might work. We agreed on some basic ideas about shared responsibility without shared romance. She took notes on her phone and I did the same. It felt businesslike and strange, but also productive. Like we were finally being honest about what this actually was. After an hour, we both ran out of things to say. I told her I was going to talk to a lawyer about understanding my rights and responsibilities. She nodded and said that made sense. We left separately and I felt this weird mix of sad and relieved. The next week, I met with Keith Bradley, who specialized in unmarried parents. His office was in a converted house with mismatched furniture and stacks of files everywhere. He listened while I explained the whole situation without judgment. Then he walked me through what legal paternity establishment looks like. Signing an acknowledgement form at the hospital, what that means for custody and support. He pulled out examples of typical arrangements and explained decision-making authority. Medical choices, education, religion, all the stuff I hadn't even thought about yet. He said we could draft a preliminary agreement now, even though it wouldn't be legally binding until after the birth. Just something in writing so Laura and I both understood what we were committing to. Over the next 2 meetings, Keith helped me put together a document covering custody schedules and financial contributions. We included sections about holidays and vacations and how to handle disagreements. Reading through it made everything feel real and overwhelming. This was my life now. Co-parenting with someone I didn't trust anymore, but having a plan made it feel more manageable than just floating in uncertainty. I opened a new savings account the same week and set up automatic transfers. $200 every paycheck going toward baby expenses, medical bills, furniture, childcare eventually. The numbers were scary when I added them up over a year, but Keith had explained that planning ahead was better than scrambling later. I bought a notebook and started tracking everything. What I spent, what Laura spent, keeping records in case we needed them later. At week 19, Laura texted asking if I would come to the anatomy scan appointment. I said yes because I wanted to be involved in major medical stuff. The appointment was early on a Tuesday and I met her at the clinic. We sat in the waiting room not talking much. Other couples around us holding hands and looking excited. We probably looked weird sitting 2 chairs apart scrolling through our phones. The tech called us back and Laura got on the table, the gel and the wand, and then suddenly there was this image on the screen. Tiny hands, a face in profile. The tech pointed out different body parts and measurements while Laura and I both stared. Everything felt suddenly real in a way the abstract idea of pregnancy never did. This was an actual person. My son. The tech asked if we wanted to know the sex and we both said yes at the same time. She moved the wand around and smiled. You're having a boy. Laura reached for my hand and I let her hold it for that moment. Her palm was sweaty and she was crying again. I squeezed back because some things go beyond a broken relationship. This was our son. Whatever else happened between us didn't change that. We were going to be parents together even if we couldn't be partners. The tech printed out pictures and Laura clutched them the whole way to the parking lot. I walked her to her car and she turned to me with this vulnerable expression. Thank you for coming. I nodded and said I would be there for the important appointments. Then I got in my own car and sat there for a while looking at the ultrasound picture she had given me. A boy. My son. Everything was changing and I was scared but also ready to figure it out one step at a time. My next therapy session with Audrey happened 3 days after the ultrasound. I sat in her office and told her about seeing my son on the screen and how real everything suddenly felt. She asked me what scared me most about becoming a father and I said everything. The responsibility, the money, sharing custody with someone I don't trust anymore. She wrote something in her notebook and looked at me. Your anger at Laura is separate from your feelings about this baby. He didn't choose any of this. I knew she was right, but separating those feelings was harder than it sounded. We spent the rest of the session talking about what kind of father I wanted to be and what that looked like practically. She gave me homework to write down 3 things I could control about the situation and 3 things I needed to let go of. I left feeling slightly less overwhelmed but still pretty scared about the whole thing. That weekend, Laura started texting me pictures of baby furniture, a crib from Target, a changing table from IKEA, a rocking chair she found on Facebook Marketplace. I realized we were about to buy duplicate everything if we didn't coordinate. I suggested we make a shared spreadsheet to track purchases and split costs. She agreed immediately and sent me a Google Sheet link within an hour. We added columns for item, cost, who bought it, and which house it would go to. It felt weirdly businesslike but also practical. Over the next few days, we filled it in with basics. She bought the crib for her place. I bought one for mine. We split the cost of a car seat since we'd need to transfer it between cars. She got a bassinet, I got a portable playpen. The spreadsheet helped us avoid fighting about money and made everything feel more manageable. At week 24, I was at work when my phone rang with Laura's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying and her words came out jumbled. Spotting. Emergency room. Please come. I grabbed my keys and told my boss I had a family emergency. The drive to the hospital felt like forever, even though it was only 15 minutes. I found her in the ER waiting area, holding her stomach with both hands and looking pale. The nurse called us back pretty quickly and got her on a bed. Laura squeezed my hand while the doctor did an exam. They hooked her up to monitors to check the baby's heartbeat and did an ultrasound to look at everything. The doctor explained that some spotting can be normal, but they wanted to make sure. The heartbeat sounded strong and steady on the monitor. The ultrasound showed everything looked fine, probably just a small issue with the placenta that resolved itself. Laura started crying again, but this time from relief. They kept her for observation for 2 hours and I stayed the whole time. I got her water and crackers from the vending machine. I helped her text her sister to let her know what was happening. When they finally discharged her with instructions to take it easy for a few days, I walked her to her car. She turned to me in the parking lot and just stood there for a minute. Thank you for coming so fast. I nodded and said of course I would come for something like this. She looked exhausted and scared. I'm really afraid of doing this alone, of being a single mom. I wish things had gone differently with us. I told her honestly that I was scared too. Being a parent was going to be hard no matter what. But we could both be good parents separately. Our son would be better off with 2 honest people co-parenting than 2 miserable people forcing a relationship that didn't work. She wiped her eyes and got in her car. I watched her drive away and then sat in my own car for a while before heading home. My next therapy session with Audrey focused on what happened at the hospital. She asked me how it felt to be there with Laura during a crisis. I said it felt like the right thing to do, but also confusing. Part of me wanted to comfort her, and part of me remembered why we broke up. Audrey explained that crisis situations can create false intimacy. When something scary happens, we fall back on old patterns and old relationships. But showing up for medical emergencies doesn't mean getting back together romantically. I needed to keep that distinction clear in my head. She reminded me that I could be supportive as a co-parent without blurring boundaries as an ex-partner. I could care about Laura's well-being and our baby's health without sacrificing the boundaries I'd set for myself. That made sense, but I knew it would be hard to maintain when emotions ran high. A few days later, Laura texted me that things at work were getting better. The gossip about her and James had mostly died down. He stayed on his separate team and they barely saw each other. She said she was actually doing better now that the affair drama was over. She'd been taking on new projects to stay busy and productive. Her boss seemed impressed with her recent work. I was glad she was finding some stability, even though part of me still felt bitter about how everything went down. At week 26, I signed up for a prenatal class at the hospital. Laura was taking a different class with her sister, so I went alone. The instructor was a nurse who'd been teaching these classes for 20 years. She covered basics like diaper changing and safe sleep practices and how to tell if a baby was sick. I sat in the back taking careful notes in my phone. The other people in the class were mostly couples holding hands and looking excited. I felt out of place being there solo, but I was determined to learn everything I could. When the instructor asked if anyone had questions, I stayed quiet, but I watched everything she demonstrated. How to support a baby's head, how to swaddle properly, how many ounces of formula per feeding. I left with a folder full of handouts and a head full of information and still feeling pretty overwhelmed about my competence level. At week 28, Laura and I met with Keith again at his office. He had our preliminary agreement pulled up on his laptop. We spent 2 hours going through it section by section and adding more specific details now that we were getting closer to the birth. Keith helped us work out a tentative custody schedule. Weeknights would mostly be with Laura since she had more flexible work hours. I'd take weekends and some evenings. We agreed on protocols for making medical and educational decisions together. We established clear financial responsibilities, including splitting medical costs and setting up child support payments. Keith explained that this still wouldn't be legally binding until after the birth, when we could formalize everything through the courts. But having it written down now meant we both understood what we were committing to. Laura signed the updated document and so did I. Keith made copies for both of us. I put mine in a folder with all my other baby paperwork that was slowly taking over my desk. The next week I went apartment hunting. My sublet was fine temporarily, but I needed a real long-term place where my son could stay with me regularly. I looked at probably 10 different apartments before finding a 1-bedroom that had enough space for a small nursery area. The rent was $200 more than my sublet, but the location was good and the building was safe. I filled out the application and provided all the required documents. 3 days later, the landlord called to say I was approved. I signed the lease that same afternoon, officially committing to staying in the city and being an active parent. That night, I measured the space where the crib would go and started planning the layout in my head. Late one night, about a week later, my phone buzzed with a text from Laura. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another furniture picture, but then I read it. I'm sorry. For everything. For the affair. For manipulating you with the experiment. For making such a mess of our lives. I take full responsibility for what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I understand how badly I hurt you. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to write back something angry. Instead, I wrote that I appreciated the apology, but what mattered now was moving forward as co-parents. We couldn't change the past, but we could choose how we handled the future. She sent back a simple okay, and that was it. I put my phone down and went to bed, feeling like maybe we were finally getting to a place where we could actually make this work. Chase showed up the next Saturday with his truck and a toolbox. We loaded boxes of baby stuff I'd been collecting, the disassembled crib still in its packaging, a changing table from a secondhand store. The new apartment felt empty when we carried everything up the stairs. Chase helped me position the crib in the corner of my bedroom, where it would get the best light from the window. We spent 2 hours following the instruction manual, connecting rails and tightening bolts. The changing table went next to it with a basket underneath for diapers and wipes. Chase stepped back and looked at the setup. He didn't say anything about Laura or the situation, just helped me organize the small space into something that could work for a newborn. When he left, I sat on my bed staring at the empty crib. My son would sleep there in a few months. The thought made my hands shake a little. At week 32, Laura and I met at the hospital for the scheduled tour. A group of about 15 couples gathered in the lobby, all of them holding hands or touching each other's backs. The tour guide, a nurse in purple scrubs, led us through the maternity ward, showing us the triage area where we'd check in during labor. She explained the admission process and what to bring. We walked past several delivery rooms with their big beds and monitoring equipment. The nurse pointed out the birthing tubs and talked about pain management options. She kept gesturing to Laura and me together, saying things like, "You'll want to make sure your partner knows where to the park," and "Dads can stay overnight in the room." Neither of us corrected her. It was easier than explaining that we were co-parents but not together, that we'd broken up during the pregnancy, that this whole situation was complicated. Laura's hand brushed mine once in the hallway and I moved it away. The tour ended with a visit to the nursery, where we could see newborns through the glass. They looked so small and fragile. I tried to picture myself holding one in a few weeks. 2 days later, Laura texted asking if I had time to talk about names. We met at the same coffee shop where this whole mess had started months ago. She had a list on her phone of boys' names she liked. I'd made my own list. We went through them one by one, crossing off the ones either of us hated. She suggested Matthew after her grandfather. I liked it, but wanted something that connected to my family too. My dad's middle name was James, but that felt wrong given everything with her coworker. We kept talking, throwing out options, finding reasons why each one didn't quite fit. Then Laura said, "What about using both our grandfathers' names? Matthew for her side, and Thomas for mine. We could call him Matt or Maddie." Something about it felt right. We both sat there for a minute letting it settle. Then she brought up the last name. She said he should have mine since I was establishing legal paternity and would be on the birth certificate. I'd expected a fight about this, but she just agreed like it made sense. Matthew Thomas with my last name. Our son had a name now. The following weekend, I drove to a baby store and bought a car seat. The salesperson showed me 3 different models and explained safety ratings and installation methods. I picked one that seemed straightforward and took it home. Then I spent an hour in my parking lot watching YouTube videos about proper installation. The base had to be at the right angle. The straps needed specific tension. I watched the same video 4 times, pausing it to check my work. I uninstalled and reinstalled the base 3 times before I felt confident it was secure. The level indicator finally showed green. I tugged on it hard to make sure it didn't move. Then I sat in my car looking at the empty seat, imagining bringing Matthew home from the hospital in it. The responsibility felt massive. My phone buzzed that evening with a message from Katie. She'd heard about the baby through someone we both knew. The text was short and kind, congratulating me and wishing me well. I stared at it for a while before responding. I thanked her and told her I hoped she was doing great. She sent back a simple thumbs up. That was it. Our connection had been real, but the timing had been impossible. She deserved someone without all this baggage. I put my phone down and felt the weight of what could have been, but I couldn't change any of it now. At week 36, Laura and I sat in her apartment finalizing our hospital plan. She wanted her sister in the delivery room along with me. I asked what my role would be during labor. She said I'd be there as Matthew's father and as her support person, helping her through contractions and staying focused on the baby. We agreed I'd be the one to cut the umbilical cord. We talked about what happens immediately after birth, skin-to-skin contact, the first feeding. Laura made me promise I'd be there no matter what time she went into labor. I promised. We wrote everything down so we both had the same understanding. No surprises, no drama, just 2 people trying to do right by their kid. I packed my hospital bag that night. Snacks because I'd heard labor could take forever and hospital food was terrible. Phone charger and backup battery. A change of clothes in case I got sweaty or dirty. A list of people to call after Matthew was born. My parents first, then Chase and a few other friends. I added a notebook to write down details I might forget later. I put the bag by my door so I could grab it fast. Every time my phone rang over the next few weeks, my heart jumped thinking it might be Laura saying it was time. The call came at 2 in the morning when I was 39 weeks. Laura's voice was tight and controlled, not panicking but clearly in pain. She said her contractions were 5 minutes apart and getting stronger. I grabbed my bag and drove to her apartment. She was dressed and had her own bag ready by the door. I helped her down the stairs, stopping twice when contractions hit. She breathed through them, gripping the railing. We timed them in the car on the way to the hospital. 4 minutes apart now. The roads were empty at that hour. I drove carefully, no sudden stops or sharp turns. Laura kept her eyes closed between contractions. We didn't talk much. I parked in the emergency lot and helped her inside to the maternity ward check-in. The labor went on for 16 hours. They got Laura into a delivery room and set up all the monitors. Her sister showed up around 6 in the morning. The contractions got worse as the hours passed. Laura squeezed my hand so hard during the bad ones I thought she might break my fingers. I stayed next to the bed, getting her ice chips when she asked, helping her shift positions when her back hurt. The nurses came in regularly to check her progress. Centimeters dilated, effacement percentages, all these measurements I didn't fully understand. Around hour 12, Laura started crying, saying she couldn't do this anymore. Her sister and I both told her she was doing great, that Matthew would be here soon. I felt useless watching her in that much pain, but I stayed. I didn't leave the room except to use the bathroom once. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite all the lies and hurt, I was grateful to be there for this moment. She needed someone, and I was Matthew's father. That mattered more than our broken relationship. At 6:47 p.m., the doctor said it was time to push. 3 more nurses came in. Everyone got into position. Laura pushed for 40 minutes, exhausting herself with each contraction. Then suddenly there he was. The doctor held up this tiny wet person who immediately started crying. They put him on Laura's chest for a minute while they cleaned him off. 7 pounds 3 ounces, the nurse announced. Then she wrapped him in a blanket and brought him over to me. I held my son for the first time. He was so small, his face red and scrunched up, his fingers curled into fists. Something shifted inside me, this fierce protective love that came out of nowhere and hit me like a truck. I couldn't stop looking at him. Laura was crying, watching us from the bed. Her sister was crying too. The nurses were cleaning up and doing their job around us, but in that moment nothing else existed except this tiny person in my arms. Matthew Thomas, my son. Whatever mess Laura and I had made of our relationship, we'd created him. That was all that mattered now. The nurse brought over a clipboard with paperwork an hour after Matthew was born. I read through the acknowledgement of paternity form while Laura held our son against her chest. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. By signing this, I was officially establishing myself as Matthew's father in the eyes of the state. Laura looked over at me, waiting to see what I would do. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the line. She signed her section too, and we both dated it. The nurse witnessed our signatures and took the clipboard back. That was it, official and legal. We were Matthew's parents, regardless of what happened between us as a couple. The next 2 days in the hospital passed in a blur of diaper changes and feeding schedules. The nurses showed us how to swaddle Matthew properly, how to support his head, how to check if he was latched correctly during feedings. Laura and I took turns practicing each skill, while the nurses watched and corrected our technique. I was surprised by how easily we worked together when we focused on Matthew instead of our broken relationship. She would hand me a clean diaper at exactly the right moment. I would grab the burp cloth before she even asked for it. We moved around each other smoothly, like we had been doing this for years instead of hours. The nurses kept calling us mom and dad and asking questions about our plans at home. They assumed we lived together and were a couple. Neither of us corrected them because it seemed pointless to explain our complicated situation to strangers we would never see again. What mattered was that we were both learning how to care for our son. On the 3rd day, they discharged us, and I drove Laura and Matthew back to her apartment. I helped carry her bags upstairs and made sure she had everything she needed before I left. 2 weeks later, we had settled into a custody rhythm that actually worked. I picked Matthew up every Tuesday and Friday evening and kept him overnight at my place. Laura packed his diaper bag with everything he needed and walked me through his current schedule each time. I brought him back the next morning and we traded notes about how he slept and ate. My therapy sessions with Audrey helped me process the stress of being a new parent while navigating co-parenting with Laura. She seemed genuinely committed to working on herself too, based on updates she shared about her own therapy. Katie had moved on with her life, and I was glad for her even though it stung a little. My focus was on being the father Matthew deserved. The future was not what I had planned when Laura and I first got together. But I was building something honest and stable from the wreckage of our relationship. Matthew would grow up knowing both his parents chose responsibility and truth over convenient lies. That mattered more than anything else. And that wraps it up for today. I like when stories hold a small lesson you can actually take into the real world. If one detail stuck with you, then it did its job. Subscribe so you are ready for the next one.